The credit crisis of 1772 was far more than a minor financial stumblite, was a global catastrophe that transformed economies, ignited rebellions, and left lessons we're still unraveling today. From Alexander Fordyce's daring yet reckless bets to the defiant Boston Tea Party, this overlooked slice of history reveals how money, power, and greed can reshape our world. So, what's on your mind? Could a crisis like 1772 strike again? Have we truly absorbed the lesson, or are we fated to relive it? Share your views in the comments, give that like button a tap, and subscribe for more hidden tales from history. In the early 1770s, the British Empire stood at the peak of its power. London, the world's financial heartbeat, buzzed with banks and trading houses, funding everything from tea shipments to colonial wars. Across the Atlantic, American colonies thrived. Merchants in Boston and Philadelphia grew rich trading with Europe and the Caribbean. But beneath this dazzling wealth, the economy was a house of cards, ready to collapse. British banks fueled a lending frenzy, pouring money into global trade with reckless optimism. Merchants and speculators borrowed heavily, snapping up land and East India Company stock. In the colonies, wealthy planters leaned on London's credit to buy land, slaves, and luxury goods, tying Britain and America in a fragile transatlantic web. Meanwhile, Scottish banks like Douglas, Heron and Company threw caution to the wind, handing out risky loans to anyone who asked. In London, bankers bet big on shaky ventures, like the teetering East India Company, already on the brink of ruin. This was a world of glittering opportunity and dangerous greed. One man was about to strike the match that would set it all ablaze. Meet Alexander Fordyce, a charismatic Scottish banker who lit up London's financial scene in the 1770s. Working for Neil, James, Fordyce, and Down, he was a rising star, charming and bold but dangerously reckless. Behind closed doors, Fordyce played a high-stakes game, betting big on East India Company stock. He wagered its price would soar, borrowing millions in today's money, using his bank's funds and even client savings. It was a gamble that could make him a fortuneer, ruin everything. In 1771, trouble brewed. Rumors swirled that the East India Company was crumbling, plagued by mismanagement and losses in India. Stock prices wobbled, but Fordyce didn't back down. He doubled his bets, borrowing even more to cover his losses. By June 1772, the truth hit hard. The company was on the brink of collapse, and Fordyce's dreams were underwater. Facing ruin, he made a desperate move. On the 8th of June, he fled London, abandoning his bank with debts worth tens of millions today. His firm collapsed overnight, sending shockwaves through the city. Creditors stormed the bank, but the vaults were empty. Panic spread as other banks, fearing a domino effect, called in loans, freezing credit across London. The crisis didn't stop there. Fordyce's fall exposed the shaky Scottish banks, like Douglas, Heron and Company, which had lent recklessly. By the end of June, it too crumbled, wiping out savings across Scotland. One man's greed had sparked a financial firestorm. The crisis didn't stop in Britain. It spread like wildfire across Europe, striking major financial centres. In Amsterdam, Dutch banks, tied to British trade, suffered massive losses, pushing the struggling Dutch East India Company closer to bankruptcy. In Hamburg and Stockholm, merchants watched their businesses grind to a halt as British loans dried up. Trade across Europe slowed to a crawl. Unemployment soared, and businesses collapsed, revealing just how interconnected the 18th century global economy had become. Across the Atlantic, the American colonies felt the blow. Merchants in Boston, Philadelphia, and New York, unable to repay London banks, faced bankruptcies and foreclosures. Southern planters, deep in debt from buying land and slaves, lost their plantations, fueling bitter resentment against British rule. The crisis also pushed the East India Company to the brink, forcing the British government to act. They passed the Tea Act of 1773, bailing out the company with a monopoly on tea sales in America. But this sparked outrage, leading to the Boston Tea Party, a defiant act of rebellion. In a way, the credit crisis of 1772 lit the fuse of the American Revolution, destabilizing the colonies and igniting anger that would soon erupt into war. The British government raced to control the chaos after the crisis hit. The Bank of England stepped in, lending money to save failing banks, a move that hinted at today's central bank bailouts. Stricter banking rules followed, curbing risky lending and exposing the dangers of over-leveraged banks, a lesson that still echoes now. Then came the East India Company bailout, with the Tea Act of 1773, meant to rescue the company, but it backfired, sparking fury in the American colonies. The crisis didn't just empty wallets, it reshaped history. Economic hardship in the colonies stoked anti-British anger, with colonists blaming London's policies and edging toward rebellion. That anger exploded with the Boston Tea Party in 1773, a bold protest that paved the way for the Declaration of Independence in 1776. The crisis also weakened Britain's grip on its colonies, stretching resources thin as they struggled to recover. Fast forward to today, the credit crisis of 1772 feels distant, but its lessons endure. Fordyce's reckless bets on East India stock mirror modern bubbles like .com and subprime mortgages. It showed how one country's collapse can ripple globally, a truth we saw in 2008 and face even now. Easy credit can boost growth, but without oversight, it spells disaster. In a world of cryptocurrencies, wild stock markets, and global trade, the tale of 1772 warns us greed and overconfidence can still bring economies crashing down. The credit crisis of 1772 was no minor setback. It was a global disaster that transformed economies, ignited rebellion, and left lessons we're still grappling with today. From Alexander Fordyce's wild gambles to the bold Boston Tea Party, this overlooked chapter of history reveals how money, power, and greed can reshape the world. So, what's your take? Could a crisis like 1772 strike again? Have we truly learned, or are we destined to repeat history? Share your thoughts in the comments, smash that like button, and subscribe for more hidden tales from the past.